US President Donald Trump unveiled sweeping reciprocal tariffs, announcing baseline 10% duties on all imports and much higher rates for some of the nations. Trump singled out major US partners for imposing trade barriers he deems as unfair, with India and the European Union facing 26% and 20% tariffs. They do it to us and we do it to them. This is what Trump has said. He also announced a staggering 34% tariff on goods from China in his Liberation Day speech. Railing against foreign cheaters and foreign scavengers, President Trump said that the US will charge an import duty of 26% on India and 34% on China. Speaking about India, President Trump described the tariffs by New Delhi as very, very tough. He went on to say that Prime Minister Modi is a great friend of mine, but you have not been treating us right. India charges us 52%, and so we will charge them half of that, that's 26%.
Tariffs give our country protection against those that would do us economic harm, and many people were looking to do us economic harm. Maybe not so obviously, but they were doing tremendous economic harm. But even more importantly, they will give us growth. These tariffs are going to give us growth like you haven't seen before, and it'll be something very special. I think you're going to remember today. It's going to be a free nation that we're dealing with. We're going to have a very free and beautiful nation. It's going to be Liberation Day in America, and it's going to be a day that hopefully you're going to look back in years to come and you're going to say, you know, he was right. This has turned out to be one of the most important days in the history of our country. India, very, very tough, very, very tough. The Prime Minister just left, and he's a great friend of mine, but I said, you're a friend of mine, but you're not treating us right. They charge us 52%. You have to understand, we charge them almost nothing.
Let's go across to Mr. Jayant Krishna, who's joining us live on the broadcast. Mr. Krishna, firstly, just help us understand, now that the tariffs have been announced, what economic consequences will India have?
See, to my mind, it's unfortunate, first of all, what has happened, because, our bilateral trade agreement was getting discussed, and there's a closure date of September 2025 for that. Recently, Rajesh Agarwal, the Additional Secretary, Ministry of Commerce, and Brendan Lynch, the Assistant U.S. Trade Representative, they have been discussing for 4 or 5 days, So discussions were happening. It comes all of a sudden. And let's also understand, see, where does this 52% come from? In the US TR report, which was tabled in the US on 31st of March, very clearly they talked about an average Indian tariff of 17%. And they said the non-agro is 13.5 and agro is 39. So how does that 17 become 52 is anybody's guess. In fact, in the US statements, they have said that the base rate that they have talked about, and in most countries they have halved that, calling it a discounted reciprocal rate. It has not only the tariff, but also including the currency manipulation, which India doesn't do at all. And trade barriers, which some of them are there for India vis-a-vis India also. I think all these factors have been taken into consideration, not just the tariff in absolute terms, the average tariff. So I think. To my mind, India should not retaliate by any very, very volatile manner. To my mind, India should study it and look at the impact on a few sectors and then carry on the negotiations. But because once this BTA, the bilateral trade agreement, it gets signed, this would in all probability overtake these discounted reciprocal tariffs that President Trump has announced on the Liberation Day. And now coming to your question of what sectors will be impacted, it's too early. But I think some sectors which are very, very clear will be impacted are steel and other metals, chemicals, jewelry. These will have a direct impact. And some other sectors which are exposed to this tariff hike by the US are automobile, pharmaceuticals, and agriculture, agro-produce, and food products. These are likely to be impacted, but we still have to see that this average rate that he has talked about, 26%. What does it boil down to in terms of by way of different product categories? because I refuse to believe that this is a uniform rate across the spectrum. That can't be the case at all. So I think it remains to be seen. But let me also tell you, in the same breath, some experts say that at this tariff structure at 26%, almost half of the Indian trade to the Indian exports to the US will be affected. But that may be true, but at the same time, it will also open a window of opportunities for India vis-a-vis other countries. Because look at the countries where this imposition of tariff is higher than India. China, it is 34%, right? South Korea is almost the same, 25%. Vietnam is 46%. Taiwan is 32%. Japan is very close, almost 24%. Thailand is 36%. Switzerland is 31%. So I think these are opportunities which get thrown to India. We need to evaluate it quickly and take the early movers advantage, because many other countries also will not be competitive to export to the US now, given these tariff barriers. So I think India should look upon this as an opportunity also, but very quickly. We don't have much time, because everybody, like India, most countries which are impacted will be looking upon other global opportunities. To my mind, this will recalibrate, the theory of competitive advantage of nations and of companies and of product categories. India will have to look at it very, very differently. It's like recalibrating the entire trade spectrum all over the world. One needs to
Right, Mr. Krishna.
look at it very, very closely.
I'd also like to bring in Michael Owens, who is Georgia's mayor. Mr. Owen, help us understand, is this move really the correct path for the Trump administration going ahead to make the America Great Again campaign? How is that likely to play out? Is that the perfect strategy going ahead?
First of all, thanks for having me on. We really can't talk about what the perfect strategy is here. What we do know is that what's being called Liberation Day, in a lot of people's minds, Inflation Day, right? It means that this intention on bolstering U.S. jobs and having this America First stance that the president has taken has really mean that we're going to see a sharp increase in many different American goods, automobiles, home goods, construction costs, across the board, you'd name it. And, we've seen impacts, obviously, with the U.S. markets. And I can tell you that in cities, in my city and cities across Georgia and across the country, looking at local economies facing this type of downturn where industries will struggle to adjust, dealing with increased prices, I can't see how this is going to play out best when looking at what our local users and what our local families are going to see.
Right, Mr. Owens. I'll also like to bring in Mr. Krishna on the broadcast. Mr. Krishna, what impact do you think will it have on the MSMEs and SMEs, which have, for the large part, been export-oriented? How are they likely to be impacted?
So MSMEs, directly also they are big exporters, and also as a supply chain for the large units, in India. So, some products may be exported by the large companies, large manufacturers. But, a lot of input for that, the raw materials and some assemblies or some components there may come from MSMEs. So MSMEs will be impacted hugely, and some of them may not even have the, the comfort level of, looking at alternatives, because they're smaller in size, they don't have deep pockets, and have, to a lesser extent, they can bear such risks, So I think MSMEs will be impacted more, to my mind, than the large corporates, because large corporates will have a basket of products, a basket of divisions, and very few companies are totally dependent, in their operations on the US, on the export to US. So I think MSMEs will be impacted more, and let us understand MSMEs for a country as a whole, they are very, very sizable. They account for almost 11% of the manufacturing workforce works in the MSME sector, and a very, very significant contributor, if memory doesn't fail me, almost 29% to the GDP of the country. I think the entire, this is such a radical, all, calculations we had done or some other experts had done of 10% or 20% reciprocal tariff and what will be the impact on US, Indian exports to the US. But this has taken everybody off guard, and I think it needs to be seen. But I think we have to really keep on negotiating till the BTA gets signed in September, and also keep looking at other opportunities elsewhere, because every country almost worth the name is affected in the world, and we have to look upon this as an opportunity rather than just drown ourselves in gloom.
Right, Mr. Krishna, thank you. I'd also like to bring in Dr. Brahma Chelani also, who's joining us on the broadcast. He's a strategic affairs expert. Mr. Chelani, help me understand here. Now, President Trump has said that India has one of the highest tariffs. And he, of course, made a comment which is not the most positive in its nature, but he also praised Prime Minister Modi. So do you think comments like that would potentially hurt the bilateral relations?
Well, he's clearly playing tariff roulette. He's exerting increasing pressure on trading partners. Some of the tariffs are designed to be a negotiating tool. Other tariffs are expected to stay in place as a regular source of revenue for the US to help cut the trade deficit and balance the budget. The larger objectives behind Trump's tariff war are to beat back the flood of imports and force American companies to invest in domestic production capacity and bring supply chains back to the US. But here is the irony of it, that he has already imposed several rounds of tariffs since he returned to the White House, starting from early February. Now, before the latest tariffs that he announced, the average tariff rate in the US went up to 12%. Now, with the latest announcement of reciprocal tariffs, that figure increases to 20% or more. That would approach levels that the US has not seen since the early 1930s. And those high tariffs in the early 1930s contributed to deepening the Great Repression. And another interesting aspect, the irony, is that India's tariff structure, tariff rates, have fallen sharply since 1991. They have fallen from 125% to below 5% on most goods imported from the United States.
Chelani.
But you see how much higher the American tariffs are. And unlike most Asian economies, India has its own overall trade deficit to worry about. India has a large trade deficit with the world, just the way the US has a large trade deficit with the world.
Yep.
The US trade deficit with the world, of course, is the world's biggest at $1.2 trillion. But that amounts to less than 4% of America's economy. By contrast, India's trade deficit with the world is over 10% of India's GDP. And I think these reciprocal tariffs that Trump has slapped on India will only further increase this deficit the deficit of India in terms of its GDP. And this will have a bearing on the value of India's rupee.
Right, Dr. Chelani. All right, thank you so much. Very special guests sharing their insights. Thank you so much. We'll keep coming to you to get the latest, and thank you again for your insights.